What happened to you when you were young that you didn't understand until years later? I was in LA at the age of 10, and ended up with sunburn as I am English and not used to the heat. My dad took me to the restroom where we shared a stall, and he helped me take my t-shirt off so that he could reapply after soon. This was pretty painful. I was screaming inside a locked stall, saying that it hurt, so was surprised when a burly guy forced open the door, looking quite annoyed at my dad, who explained correctly what was happening. I grimaced through the pain and agreed as best as possible. Only years later that I realized that burly guy was a top bloke, and that the pain he was trying to save me from wasn't that kind of chafing. TLDR, a nice bear-like man made sure I wasn't being molested by my own father. This makes me happy that there are people out there that won't just turn a blind eye to these things. I found it in my dad's closet when I was 6. Looking back on it now, it was probably a toy, or just something he made to look like a woman's. Either way, I pulled it out of his closet and was sitting next to it on the couch when he got home from work. I was a lonely kid. Edit, I'm a girl. This made me actually laugh out loud, just chilling with it on the couch, ahaha. When me and my sister were around the ages of 8 and 6, we gave our mom a necklace for her birthday. She was about 36 years old at that time. It was a blue/green twinkling necklace, and we thought it was perfect for mom because she loves glitter and jewelry. She wore it at every occasion she had guests for dinner and similar. We were very proof of our gift because she liked it so much that she wore it all the time. Years later I realized that it was an ugly piece of... Really, no sane human would wear this dog collar in disguise. I cringed at the thought of actually giving it to mom. Then it clicked, she probably only wore it when she was at the house or we were around. She wore it for us, so that we don't feel guilty of gifting things to her while making a fool out of herself in front of everybody else. I love you, Mom. When I was about 14, a guy who I went to school with had leukemia. He'd disappeared from school for a while he had chemo, and then came back when he recovered a little. We weren't particularly close, in fact there'd been a little bit of animosity between us, for no particular reason, just petty kids stuff, but last day of term as I was walking towards the school gate, he caught up with me and walked with me. He told me he was sorry there'd been tension between us and that he liked me and hoped we could be friends. He died during the summer break, and I realized some time later that maybe he had known he wasn't going to make it, and was trying to make his peace with the world before he went. How did you react to him saying this to you? When I was a little kid, we had a kid in our class named George who was mentally retarded. We had special needs kids in our school, and we wouldn't have them in the same class, but they would share recess with the rest of the kids. George dressed funny, he couldn't speak very well, and he had a hard time understanding what we were telling him. As you might imagine, this led to a lot of the kids excluding him or making fun of him. My friends and I decided to be his friend. He was a nice kid, didn't mean any harm. He was just a bit slow. Years later, in telling the story to someone else, I remembered my teacher explaining that he was Greek, which I didn't understand at the time. Thinking about it, I remembered that just like the special needs kids, the ESL kids shared recess with us. George wasn't retarded. He was just a recent immigrant from Greece who didn't speak English very well. Edit, removed a typo. Visiting my aunt and her cool roommate Susan when I was a child. Didn't realize until my cousin said something when I was in high school. You mean her rooma, oh holy. Found out my uncle was gay the same way. LOL. So many birthday cards and holiday cards from Uncle D and his roommate M. Never questioned it really. Thought it was really nice that his roomie signed our cards though. My mom told me my goldfish ran away. I love the misconceptions kids have about animals. When my brother was younger, he found a smooth, rounded milky quartz at the beach, and thought it was cool, so he brought it home and put it in his hamster's cage so it could play with the rock. Maybe 2 hours later he'd already forgotten about this, goes to check on the hamster or something, then screams and runs out yelling that his hamster had laid an egg. Of course, being the little I was, I smugly told him that wasn't possible because his hamster was a boy. We had a science fair in 6th grade, and I was doing some sleep experiment or something. Being the smart know-it-all I was, I referred to my subjects as testes, like trainees, I thought. My teacher politely suggested calling them test takers instead. Years later it dawned upon me, and I have mad respect for him not laughing in my face. I would have. When I was 12, my divorced mother and I lived in a nice duplex in my hometown. She would go to the city after I fell asleep, and party downtown with my aunt almost every night. I didn't know this until I was older. One night in particular, I fell asleep on the couch, and halfway woke up to the sound of the front door opening and closing. I saw my mom walk in, with a creepy, hooded, shadowy figure close behind her. I fell back asleep. The next morning, I asked my mom who was with her when she came home last night. She looked terribly confused. I told her about the figure behind her, and the color drained out of her face, and she shook her head and told me to stop playing games. That if I kept telling ghost stories I would invite malevolent spirits into the house. Found out like a year ago that she brought a guy home and made me believe it was a ghost so I wouldn't tell my grandparents. Crafty bitch. TLDR, my mother brought a guy home one night and let me believe for over 10 years that I had seen a ghost. Wow. Sometimes we would stop at my aunt's work, so that my dad could go in and talk to her. I wasn't allowed in, because I was a kid, and it was an adult place. The only other things that ever got the descriptor adult were adult films, which were not for kids because of all the. So I happily assumed that my aunt worked someplace where all sorts of was happening. Years later, I was driving by and noticed that it was a retirement home. Ha. This is like the opposite of every other story on this thread. First grade, a girl in my class would always wear a dress to school and the guy sitting next to me would always drop his pencil to take a peek. One day the teacher caught him in the act and sent him to the school shrink. The guy went to a different school a week later. About a month later, the girl moved away. However, that guy ended up in the same high school with me. We ended up in the same gym class and got to talking. He told me that the girl was being raped by the father. He kept dropping his pencil to see the horror show of bleeding. He thought that's how girls were made, they chop off the wiener. He was genuinely curious to see when the bleeding stopped. He was too scared to ask her directly about the chopping. After the school psych figured out he wasn't a peeping Tom, they called the cops on her dad. When I was about 4 or 5 we got 2 very important life-changing bits of medical news. THD first was my baby brother was on the way. The second was that my father was diagnosed with acute lymphoma and had about 2 weeks to live. When I was little I had no grasp of how serious cancer was. My mom told me my dad was sick, but that was about it. I remember my mom kept insisting that I spent time with him, but I would always get angry when he got too tired to play or kicked me out so he could vomit from the chemo. I remember one night in particular where my school had my first back-to-school night/carnival. They had all sorts of rides and stuff. My dad had just had extensive surgery and had staples across his entire neck. I used to joke that he was like Frankenstein. My dad managed to make it through the big presentation the teacher made to the whole class and their parents, but barely. I thought this was boring, but would be worth sitting through because I would get to go on carnival rides afterwards. But my dad had to leave. He couldn't even stand up. I could not understand how my strong 6 feet 4 inches father could be so selfish. If he could sit through the boring part, why not the good part? I to this day feel tremendously guilty over how I treated him and the tantrum I threw when my mom was struggling to hold my dad up and my dad was struggling just to stay conscious. Fortunately the doctors were wrong. He made it well past the 2 weeks and eventually beat cancer 5 years later. It took years before I understood how seriously sick he really was. He had gotten down to 90 pounds, but to me he was still a superman. We had this gym teacher in elementary school that would bring a bag of apples to class and give the girls one if they'd give him a massage. I was pissed because I absolutely loved apples, still do. I thought it was unfair that only the girls got apples, so I told my teacher how Mr. So-and-so would only let the girls massage him for apples and we had to do sports. I was not an athletic child, so the idea of eating apples vs gym activities greatly appealed to me. I had to go to the principal's office to tell them my story, which was basically this is bull. Everyone should be getting apples, or no one should be getting apples. Other students corroborated my story and soon enough so-and-so was gone. TLDR. Escaped, prevented, and ended potential abuse from a teacher because I love apples.